Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Good
sir.
morning.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, and also my screen is visible to all of you, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in our yesterday session, we have discussed what is multi-threading, what is asynchronous programming, and we came to know that asynchronous programming is nothing but how you can effectively utilize the multiple threads to run your application. So if you are simply using multi-threading programming, then once a thread start executing a method, if that method doing some more time, right? If that method calling some database operation or calling some external API. That means if that thread communicating with the external system, right? And if that external system taking some time to return the response back, then in that case, your thread will be blocked in the case of a multi-threading. And if you use asynchronous programming, right, then it will not wait till the response will come. The thread will be released and that thread will be do some other task. And when the response back, then the thread will start resuming from where it is left, right? So this is what asynchronous programming. So basically we came to know that if it is a IO bound operation, IO bound operation in the sense if it is communicating with the external system, then you have to use asynchronous programming. And if it is a CPU bound operation, CPU bound operation means you are doing a heavy loop, right? If you are doing a uh, executing a heavy operation on your code, right, on your application, then you can improve the performance by using parallel programming. What is parallel programming? Everything we'll discuss after discussing the asynchronous programming. So from today and in the few upcoming sessions, right, we are going to keep focus on asynchronous programming. It is very, very important, right? Why it is very, very important? See, in your real-time application, it is not possible that within a single application you are going to write the everything, right? So it is not possible. So basically we are developing entire application, right? One tire communicating with another tire, right? So suppose generally if you talk about the application, right, so basically what happened, the UI layer is there, right, which can be developed using your ASP.NET, right? It is, or it can develop using Angular. It can be your Android app, right? It can be your iOS app, right? It can be your React, etc. So different types of a UI layer, right? So this UI layer, right, will call your web API service, which you can be called as your RESTful service, right? And in this RESTful service, right, as this is the a layer which you directly interact by the your UI layer, right? In this say in this layer, you never going to write any kind of a business logic, right? So from this UI layer, you need to communicate with the business logic layer, right? The ideal layer, what I'm saying. So in business logic layer, you have to write the business logic, right? But in this layer, you are not writing any database related logic, right? From business layer, you need to call the data access layer. The responsibility of data access layer is basically to perform the CRUD operation by communicating with the database, right? So basically, this layer will communicate with the database layer. And communicate with the DB. That means from database layer, you are communicating with the database. See, from this, suppose your UI communicating with the web API communicating with the business logic communicating with the database access layer, data access layer is trying to communicate with the database. And sometimes from this business logic layer, you might be communicating, right? You might be communicating with some other third-party APIs. For example, right? You are taking the service of a payment gateway, right? For payment gateway, you have to call the payment gateway APIs. Yes or no? Payment gateway APIs, right? You have implemented the functionality for recharge, right? So you are providing the service, you are developing an application where you are providing the functionality for mobile recharge, right? For performing the recharge, you have to communicate some third-party APIs like some O2, right? One of the company provided this is O2. You are providing the flight booking functionality or hotel booking functionality, right? Flight or hotel booking. For that, you might be communicating with another third-party API called a Clear Trip, right? So these are nothing but some other APIs which you have to call from the business layer, right? From once you perform the operation, you need to access the data access layer, right? So in this case, you can see UI layer calling your web API. And if you have not developed the web API as web services as asynchronous, right? Then that web service, right, what you are developing, he cannot handle multiple requests, right? Similarly, this is your business logic layer. If you are not calling these third-party APIs, right, by using asynchronous method, then the thread is going to be limited, right? Thread is going to be limited. Similarly, data access layer, here you are trying to communicate with the database, right? What it means, you are performing some DB operation. If your thread is going to be blocked for some time, right, while performing the data access logic, right, then it's going to be a loss, right? So basically, and in your application, don't think that everything is going to be in a single application. This is one server where you hosted the web APIs. This is going to be another server which is going to be internally invoked by this API, right? This is another server where your data access layer is hosted, and this is database, which is a different server altogether where your database is hosted, right? And from different server, you are communicating with different services. So this is the thing that you need to remember, right? Otherwise, you are developing application, if you are not implementing asynchronous programming, then the thread as once they are calling some external API, right, external in the sense, for UI layer I'm communicating with the web API. For UI layer, this is external layer. From web API service layer, I'm communicating business layer. Then for web API, this is external layer. For business layer, logic layer, I'm calling other third-party APIs, recharge APIs, flight, hotel APIs, right? These are nothing but external layer for this layer. From business layer, we are calling data access layer. Then data access layer is external to business layer. From data access layer, we are calling the database, right? Performing the CRUD operation. Then for database layer, this is the external layer. So whenever we are communicating with external layer, right, then this is nothing but a IO bound operation. And whenever you are implementing IO bound operation, then you need to consider using asynchronous programming. Why I'm not using multi-threading and why I'm preferring asynchronous programming is because if I'm using multi-threading, then the thread once called the third-party API, then that thread is going to be in sleep mode, right? That the thread will be blocked, and that thread will not do any other task until and unless that thread complete its task, right? But if I'm using asynchronous programming, then in that case, the thread which is calling the third-party APIs or external APIs, and after calling the API, that thread will not be blocked, that thread will be released so that that same thread can perform some other task. And when it gets the response, again the thread will come and resume its task from where it left. This is the advantages of multi-threading, asynchronous programming, which can effectively improve your effectively utilize your thread. Again, coming to the time part, whatever time, that time execution time is not going to be improved, right? Why I'm saying is execution time is not going to be improved, right? Why? See, once a request come, right, the request one come, and whatever time this web API going to take, right, including the waiting time of the API response, that time is not going to be decreased. That time is not going to be decreased, right? For example, if API, for example, this database CRUD operation take a 2 milliseconds to execute. I'm calling this flight API. It is taking 3 milliseconds to execute, right? I'm calling this business logic, right? It is again taking some 1 second to execute, right? Some 1 milliseconds to execute. And for web API service, if it is taking some 2 milliseconds to execute, then overall for this request, including the waiting time 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, the overall time is going to be 2 plus 1, 3 plus 3, 6 plus 2, 8 milliseconds. This time you cannot decrease. This is going to be fixed. Then what you can increase? The number of requests, right? The number of HTTP request or the number of a request is going to be increased, right? This is what we have discussed. Why the number of request is increased? Now, because think that there are 10 threads available to execute your application code. If 3 threads are blocked, then only 5 threads are available. If one request again 3 threads blocked, then in that way only 4 to 5 requests or 3 to 4 requests you can solve. But in that case, if the thread are released immediately, if the threads are not blocked, then they can handle multiple requests. So this is the advantage. So if you are using one application where you want that application to be simultaneously uh, executed by multiple people, multiple people or multiple users, then in that case you need to consider using asynchronous programming. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right. So we have already discussed this thing in our last session. So now what we are going to do, we are going to discuss what is async and await operator, how you can create if I'm creating a async method with void, what it means. If I'm using async method with task, what it means. If I'm using task of t, what it means, right? Wow, what exactly we need to use, in what scenario, what is required, right? And how you can make the asynchronous programming. All these things we are going to discuss. So to implement asynchronous programming in .NET framework, right? Even though if Java people, they also might know, for implementing asynchronous programming, we have to use 2 keywords. One is async keyword and another one is await keyword. The idea is that, right, if we have a method in which we want to use asynchronous programming, then we need to mark that method with the async keyword, right? Suppose you are having this public void sum method, right? And you want this sum method to be a asynchronous method. Then what you need to do? You have to mark this method with the async keyword as follows. So here you can see I'm marking this method with async keyword. So it is similar. If you want to create a static method, what you need to mark? You have to use static keyword. If you want to make a method as partial, then you have to use partial keyword. If you want to override a method, you have to use the override keyword. Similarly, if you want to make a method as async, then you have to mark that method with async keyword. Is that clear? First thing is async. Once you mark the method as async keyword, then that method will become one asynchronous method, right? And those asynchronous operation for which you do not want to block the execution thread, that is current thread, right? We need to use the await operator, right? You need to use the await operator, right? What it means. Now, if you do not want, see your program execution is started. It's a asynchronous method. So inside this asynchronous method, so task.delay 500 I have written. So this is similar to thread.sleep 500. That means what? Your current thread is going to be sleep for 500 seconds. And in this case, the method execution is also going to be delay for 5 seconds. That means whatever statement you have written after this statement, right? That statement is going to be delay by 5 seconds. So in this case, what I am trying to make you understand is await task the delay. Don't forget about this task the delay. Consider that you are making a database operation. You are calling a third-party API, and that third-party API taking 5 seconds to complete. And if you do not want, right? If you do not want, right, the thread to be blocked here, and if you want to release the thread as soon as this method called, right, then you have to use this await keyword. Once you use the await keyword, right, guys, consider carefully. It is possible that without await keyword you can call this method. It is also possible that using await keyword you can call the method. What is the difference between them? If you use the await keyword, right, then what will happen? The thread will be released and it will wait till the operation completed, means it will wait till it get the response from the third party APIs or from the database operation. And once it get the response, then only the next statement is going to be executed. But in that case, how much time that operation is taking? 5 seconds, 2 seconds, 10 seconds, right? That time the thread will not be blocked, that thread will be released, and that thread will continue its continue some other task. Now, if the await keyword, if we are not using the await keyword, then what will happen? In that case, it will simply call the method and it will not wait till the method complete its execution. It will do it will continue doing the other task, right? So await means, so it will do two things. One thing is it will make sure that the method execution completed and some response is back, right? And it will also make sure the thread which is waiting for the response will be released so that the same thread can do some other task. If you are not using this await keyword, then it will not wait the method to complete its execution. It will just call that operation, it will call that method, or it will call that API, and it will continue doing its task. So in that case, the thread will not wait, so the thread will continue doing its task and it will continue the task. Is that clear?
Yes. Yes.
Clear or not?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So let us try to understand this thing with an example. So in this case, right, in this case, you can say this is my sum method. Here I'm not using asynchronous programming. Simply I'm writing the, right?
Office कुछ भी.
What is this, Sagar? You have to mute yourself. Okay, fine.
Sorry, sir.
It's okay. So you can say this is my main method, and here I'm using some method, right? And you can see in this program, right? In this program, I'm not using any kind of asynchronous programming, right? So here main method started. I have called the sum method. Sum method started. Here you can see sum method started. It's printed. After printing the sum method started, it is going to block the thread for 5 seconds, right? It will block the thread for 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, the sum method will end, and after the sum method end, this main thread is going to be end. That means what? It means in this scenario, the thread is blocked from 5 seconds. As the thread is blocked for 5 seconds, it cannot do the other task, right? Other task means it cannot complete this execution, it cannot continue this thing, right? As the thread is blocked. That it makes sense. It makes sense to execute or not execute this two statement, because after completing this statement execution, I want to execute this statement. But even though that is not possible, that thread is blocked means this statement is also not going to be executed. Assume that here you are calling the assume you are calling what? You are calling external, you are communicate, you are calling external API, right? You are consuming or you are communicating with the external system, right? Or external API you are calling. So in this case, so the thread is going to be blocked. That means you will see the UI thread, right, which is executing your application, is going to be blocked for 5 seconds. See, after executing this main method started, some method started, you can see the output is blocked, right? So you can see after 5 seconds, again, it will resume the execution, some method end and main method end. So this time what it is blocked, right, is because it is not asynchronous programming. If you use asynchronous programming, then what will happen? Now, after it, once it call the async method, right, then it will not block, right? It will not block the thread. It will release the thread so that the thread can come and execute other code of the application. And once the 5 seconds completed, then it will again resume the execution from where it left. If you use the asynchronous programming. So in this case, you can see the thread is blocked for few seconds, right? Now, what I'm going to use? I'm going to use the asynchronous method, right? I'm going to use the asynchronous method. How I can use the asynchronous method? So first of all, what you need to do, if you want to use asynchronous method, then you have to use the async keyword, right? Let me write the async keyword, right? ASYNC, async keyword. Once you type the async keyword, right, then what you need to use? Don't use this thread.sleep because it is not a async operation, right? If you are using async keyword, then you have to use asynchronous operation. What is the asynchronous operation? You have to use task, right? System.threading.task, right? So task dot delay, right? And here you have to pass. So if you go to the definition, right, you can see task dot delay in time span, or you can pass in milliseconds. So whichever option you want, you can pass. So what I'm trying to do, I'm just copy pasting this. So it is going to delay the execution for 5 seconds. And what you can see, there is a warning. What warning it is saying? It is saying return return a time span that represents specified number of second where the specification is accurate to the nearest milliseconds. Why we are getting? Because this call is not awaited. Execution of the current method continues before the call is completed. Consider applying await operator to the result of the call. So what he is saying, so here you are not using the await operator. So before completing the execution of this method, the rest of the statement that you have written in the method is going to be continued. If you want to wait till the method execution is completed, then you have to use what operator? Await operator. Clear? So in this case, if I'm using await operator, then it will wait till the method execution is completed. After the execution is completed, then it will continue the execution of the rest of the statement of this method. But this await method, as you are using here await operator or await keyword, so this will do two things. One is it will release the thread so that the other statement which are written, right, which are there in the main method, those statement is going to be executed. And this await method also, this await operator also makes sure that once this execution, once this method, delay method execution is completed, then only the other statement which are present inside this method is going to be executed, right? So await means it will suspend the execution of current thread, release that current thread so that the current thread can execute the other statement, right, or can do the other task, and it will resume from here only once this method execution completed, right? So in this case, once I start executing the application, then you will see that main method started, some method started, main method immediately end, right? And then after some time, right, after 5 seconds, the some method is going to be end, right? Let me run the application. See, you can see main method started, some method started, main method end. It is waiting. Once the delay method execution completed, then the thread will resume the execution from here only. So it will execute this last and a new line is created, and then some method and this statement is going to be executed. Is that clear? What is the use of await operator and async method? And guys, if your method is not async, right, then you cannot use this await. If your method is not async, you cannot perform a await operation. First of all, you have to declare the method as async. Once you declare the method as async, then as part of that method body, you can perform some asynchronous operation, right? Await operator you can use right now. Is that clear? What is the use of async and await, and what is this task dot delay? This is the asynchronous version of the sleep method what you have in thread class. So thread dot sleep, it is making this current thread to sleep for 5 seconds. This is exactly doing the same thing, but the difference is that in this case the thread is blocked for 5 seconds. In this case the thread is not blocked for 5 seconds. The thread is going to be released, but the execution of this method is blocked for 5 seconds. But that thread which is executing your code, that thread will be released, and that thread is going to do some other task. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So this is the use of async and await operator. Now,
Sir, one doubt.
yeah, ask me.
So when we hit the await method, that
Mhm.
time the main thread which is executing, it will release that thread, and that thread will
See,
go
see,
and
see, see,
rest of the.
don't consider the main thread. In this example, I'm calling this method using main thread. It is might be possible that you have created a different thread, that a different thread is calling this thread, right?
Okay.
So any thread. So in this case, main thread is calling. It's possible that you are creating another method and you are executing that method using a different thread. That a different thread calling this method, right? That method is going to be released.
Yeah. So yeah, whatever thread which is executing that method, it will release that thread, and that thread will go and execute rest of the lines which are there in that method. So
Exactly.
await will be executing at the background, and once the task is completed, after that it will take any thread, or it will take the same thread back.
Any thread,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Any thread. So in this case, I'm using this main method and asynchronous programming, right? But most of the time, if you are developing APIs, right? So at the same time, multiple requests come to the API. So any available thread that will come into the picture, right? Now, now what I need to make sure is I'm removing this statement. I'm removing the await keyword. So in this case, what will happen? It will execute this main statement. It will execute this statement, but after executing this statement behind the scene, this delay method is going to be completed 100% sure. But it will not wait till the method it will not wait till the method complete its execution. It will continue the execution of the rest of the statement. So because in this case we are not using await operator, right? If you are not using the await keyword, then the method execution, right, the next statement execution will not be wait. It will continue as it is, right? So in this case it is just calling the asynchronous operation or just calling the third party API and continue the execution of the method. It is not going to wait till the method execution completed, right? So in this case, you can see main method started, some method started, you calling the asynchronous method, then some method end, then main method end. So if you are not using await, then the thread is not going to be suspend, because in this case, the thread is not going to be in waiting mode, right? So it simply call the external API and do its task as it is, right? So clear. But in this case, you can see we are getting a warning message which clearly tell that this method is not awaited. This call task.delay is not awaited. Execution of the current method continues, right? Before the call is complete. So if what is saying now, before this method execution completed, it's possible that the current method execution is going to be completed, right? So now it's up to you whether what you want. You want once this method execution completed, then I want to continue complete this, or it doesn't matter whether this method is completed or not, I want to continue this. So now it's up to your business requirement. If you want, you can await this operation, and if you do not await, then that you simply need to remove the await keyword. In that case, you only get a warning, not an error. It's a warning, right? Warning is fine. Clear?
Yeah.
So now what we understand? We understand two things. One is async and one is await, right? But if you remember, what is the return type I'm using here?
Void.
Void. If if you want to use, right, from asynchronous method, right? Suppose
Sir, if here we have two methods with async keyword, so two methods will run parallelly, like multi-threading.
sorry.
If we have two methods like some method one and some method two with the same async keywords, so in background some method one will run parallelly with some method two,
See why?
because we have async keyword.
Sorry. Async keyword means what? What
It's like
is
one thread is running this some method.
okay? Let me go give you that clarity. So
I
in
think
this
she
case,
means she wants two methods, two async methods,
yeah,
not only one.
I'm just creating that example. So you are having some method one and some method two. You are calling some method one and you are calling the some method two like this,
Okay.
right? right? So what you are saying parallelly. So why they are going to execute parallelly? In this case, this method execution started, right? The thread is in this statement, the thread is going to be delayed, right? Once the thread is delayed, that thread will release that thread here again. It is coming and executing this statement. So what I'm saying, asynchronous programming is not meant to improve your application performance, right? So whatever time that is going to be fixed. In this case, though both are not going to be executed parallelly, it will be started execution fast. And when method is delayed for 5 seconds, the thread will be released and the thread will going to start the execution of the second method,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, got it.
See, main method started, some method started, again some method started, then main method end, and you can say after some time some method end, and after some time some method end is going to be after, right? So this is how. And if you want to, that is what your question, how to execute multiple tasks using asynchronous programming, we will see, but not in this way. That is a different story altogether. Now, if you want to execute this two method parallelly, then there is some option available, right? So which we will discuss in our parallel programming, right? So there is a parallel.invoke, right? Parallel.invoke option is there, right? By using parallel.invoke, you can execute this two method parallelly, right? We'll see discuss. We will see. So what is basically see asynchronous method? Why we are going to use asynchronous method? Asynchronous method. Say in this case, this is some method one and some method two, right? They are not external to the our main method. Are they external to our main method or internal to our application?
Internal.
So for internal purpose, right, we are not using this asynchronous programming. We are using asynchronous programming when we are dealing with some external application. So in this case, we are assuming that we are calling an external API, and for that for that purpose, I'm making this method as async, and I'm using the await operator. And what is the advantages we will get here? Now, once it calls the external API, it will not wait till the response is back, right? It will, this thread which is executing this the thread which is calling the external API, that thread will be released. Did you attend yesterday's session?
Yes, sir. I watched the video.
Okay. So in that case, it will not wait, right? It will release the thread, that thread is going to do or execute the other method, right? And from that other method, again, the waiting time, the thread will be released, right? I will show you some example, right? In our next session, I'm going to show you how to execute multiple methods asynchronously, right? If you see the syllabus, we are just going step by step. Step by step means first you need to understand what is async and await, right? After understanding async and await, then we will try to understand how to return some data from asynchronous operation, right? Simply writing integer is not going to work, right? If I'm writing integers here, what I'm doing, the return type or async method must be void task or a task of t, right? So if you write void, that is fine, but you cannot write integer, right? Then how you can return integer data, how you can return some string data, right? That is what the next thing we are going to discuss, right? Then we will discuss how to execute multiple tasks, how to limit the number of a concurrent tasks, how to cancel a task. Cancel a task means what? You are calling, suppose in this case, you are calling this method, right? This is an external API you are calling, and you assume that if within 2 seconds or within 3 seconds this method execution completed, that is fine for me. If it is taking more than 3 seconds, then cancel this method execution. How you can do this? That is also we are going to discuss. What is retry pattern? Suppose you are implementing some logic, right? Recharge application. First time the recharge failed. I want to continue one more time, right? How you can implement? What is one pattern? What is retry pattern? Those are we are going to discuss. So many things we are going to discuss. Even what is value task? That is also we are going to discuss, right? What is asynchronous stream? How to cancel asynchronous stream? Right? What is chaining stream? Right? So of everything we are going to discuss, but that is step by step, right? But coming to your point, these two methods are not going to be executed parallelly or simultaneously, right? So this method execution will start fast, right? And once that method execution completed, or once the thread which is executing this method, right? If once that thread released, so in this case, the main thread is responsible for executing this method code, and the main method is going to execute this method, right? As it's a single main method, then how you can perform two tasks at the same time? Not possible. So he will start execution of method one, and once the this asynchronous operation is happening, then that main thread will be released, and that main thread will execute the other code of our application, in this case this method. And again this method execution started, again the thread is going to be calling one asynchronous operation, again that thread is released, right? Once that thread is released, then this statement is going to be executed. And once any of the operation, right, once this operation finished its task, then this statement is going to be released. And after this, once this operation completed, then this statement is going to be executed, right? This is how your asynchronous programming is going to work. And coming to your part, how I can execute two methods parallelly, that is parallel programming, and that we will see in practice, right? What is parallel programming? So for that, you have to use parallel.invoke method, right? By using that parallel.invoke, see, I have shown you one example of a parallel for loop, right? Similarly, parallel for each loop, parallel invoke, right? By using parallel invoke method, you can invoke multiple independent methods parallel. So we will see everything in practical. Just wait and keep patience. So in this case, you can see if you are using the await operator, then it is wait till the method execution is completed further, right? And then once the method execution completed, it is going to execute the rest statement of the method. And if you are simply removing the await operator, right, await keyword, then it will not wait till the method execution completed to execute the further statement, right? The other statement of the method are simply going to be executed immediately after calling this asynchronous operation. But if you are making, if you want to make sure, yes, my method execution completed, then only I'm going to execute the rest of the code, then you have to use await keyword. And once you use the await keyword, right, once this method asynchronous operation happening, then that thread is released, and that thread is going to execute the rest of the code of your application. Is that clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
But now if I execute this code, right, if I execute this method using a multi-threading, right, then in that case, right, so suppose I created one thread. Okay, let me show you. Some method 2, and here I'm using thread.sleep, right? So what I'm trying to make you is, please observe, thread t equals to new thread, and I'm passing some method 2, and here I'm writing t dot start, right? So in this case, what will happen, right? This is my thread 2, let's assume, right? So this child thread or thread 2 will start executing this method sum2, right? And when this statement is executed, this thread 2 will be blocked. This thread 2 will be slipped. Slip means that thread 2 will be blocked, and that thread 2 will not do any other task at that time, right? In these 5 seconds, right, which the external API is taking, this thread is going to be in blocked state. That means neither this thread can execute the statement in this method, neither that thread can go and do some other task, right? That thread is going to be blocked. But in this case, the thread which is executing this application code, this some method 1 code, when I'm doing when I'm calling this asynchronous operation, right, that thread is going to be released, that thread is going to do some other task, but not in the same method, but from some other task. This code is going to be executed after this operation completed, same like this once the thread right, once the external API completed, then you can continue this statement execution. In this case, as you are using await operator, same thing is going to be happening here. But in this case, the thread is not going to be blocked. The thread is going to be released, and that thread can go and execute some other code of your application. But in this case, the thread is simply blocked. That is the difference between your multi-threading and your asynchronous programming. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now let us try to understand how you can return data, right, from your asynchronous operation, right? So you have seen in this example, right, we have discussed, sorry. Before that, we need to understand something called the task class, right? So now we are going to discuss the task in C#, right? What is the task, right? How we can use this task with asynchronous programming. That is what we are going to discuss. We have already discussed the use of async and await operators in C#. In C#, when we have an asynchronous method, in general, we want to return one of the following data, right? So you have two options, right? So you can see either you return void. Void means what? Your method is not going to be return anything. Apart from void, if you want to return some data, then you have to use what? The return type of async method must be void, task, or task of a T. Understand, task or task of a T. Void means it is not going to return anything. Now, if you want to return something, then what you need to use? You need to use task or task of a T, right? So basically, we need to understand this thing, right? Task and task of a T. But recently, with the latest .NET framework, you can also use value task or value task of a T, right? So once we discuss it, in this case, this is going to be a task and here value task, right? So what is the difference? The difference we will discuss once we started discussing the value task. But for today, and we are going to keep focus on this task and the task of a T, right? So what is this task? The task data type, right? It's a data type and it's a generic type, right? So because T means the type you have to specify what type of data you want to return, you have to specify using this T parameter. And you can use this task and the task of T as a return type of an asynchronous operation, right? If you have an asynchronous method and if you want to return something from that asynchronous method, right, then you have to use task and the task of T. So what exactly this task tells? This task is basically, it's a promise. It's basically a promise that the operation to be performed will not necessarily to be completed immediately, but that operation is going to be completed in the future, right? If you are using the task, then it will tell the user, right? If you are using the method return type as a task or a task of a T, then it will tell the caller of this asynchronous operation that this method execution might not be completed immediately, but the operation is 100% going to be completed in your future. So it's a promise. I'm promising you that you are calling me means I'm going to definitely complete the execution of this method, if not now, but in future, right? It's possible that immediately it might be completed, but if it is not completed immediately, but that definitely going to be completed in the future. So task means it will give you a promise that the operation 100% going to be completed. Not necessarily to be completed immediately, but it might be possible that sometimes the operation is going to be completed in the future. Is that clear? Guys? Okay, if not clear, right? Once we start discussing the task and task T of example, then you will get more clarity. So what is the difference between task and a task of T? See, you can use both of them, task and a task of T, as the return type of an asynchronous method. The difference between them is that task is for method that do not return a value, while task of T is for method that return a value of type T, where T can be any data type such as integer, class, and float, anything, right? So what is the difference, right? Suppose your asynchronous method does not return anything, right? So generally, if your asynchronous method doesn't return anything, you are using void, right? You are using void. Even though if your method does not return anything, you can also use a task. So if your asynchronous method does not return anything, you have two options. One is void and other one is task. What is the difference between them? Now the difference between them is that if you use void, right? if you use void while calling the method, right? While calling the method, right? So I'm calling this sum method, right? I'm calling the sum method, right? So right, I cannot use the await keyword here, right? Why? If your method return type is void, then you cannot use the await keyword. You simply need to call the method, right? But if your method return type is void, right, you can use await keyword. You can use await keyword, right? You have written some statement here, some statements. You have written some statement, right? So what is the difference between these two, right? If you are using void, means you cannot use this await keyword, right? You simply need to call this method, right? So once you call this method, right, then what will happen? So in this case, right, what will happen? So in this case, you cannot wait the method to complete its execution. If you want that method to complete its execution, then I'm going to, or what? Then I'm going to do my task. Then you have to use await operator, right? And if you want to use await operator, then you have to use this method return type as task. We'll see this thing practically. That is the thing. See, if you are using void, then you cannot use await. If you are using task, then you can use await, right? So once you use task, you can use await. And once you use await, then what it will give you? So once the method execution completed, then it will give a confirmation, right, to this statement that the method execution completed. So you can go and do other tasks, right? And if you are not using await, right, it doesn't matter whether the method execution completed or not. The statement which are written after the sum method going to be executed immediately. The way, see, in this case, if I'm not using the await keyword here, then after calling this method, this statement are going to be executed immediately or not,
Yes.
right? So if I'm using the await keyword here, then the thread will be released, but this statement is going to be executed only when this method complete its execution. Yes or no?
Yes.
Right? Okay, so if you are having confusion, let me give this example once more. Because this is the thing that you need to understand. Once you understand, then it is not a difficult thing. Right? So what I'm trying to make you is, so in this case, I'm using await. Await means you can see main method will start, some method will start. It is waiting till the method execution is completed. And this waiting time, this thread will not be blocked. It will be released. And you can see this method, this main method will be complete. And then this sum method is going to complete. So let me run the application. So in this case, it will wait till the delay method, right? What asynchronous operation you are performing, that needs to be complete. See, main method started, some method started, main method end, some main method started, right? Then some method started, then main method end, then it is taking some time. And after then the some method is going to be complete. So in this case, you are able to call this await method because the delay method return type is going to be task. You are calling this await method because the delay method return type is going to be task. Clear? Now what I'm trying to do is I'm going to do the same thing, right? So here, right here, what I'm trying to do, I'm writing some statement, right? Okay. I'm writing some statement. Okay. Some call some method started, call some method ended, right? So in this case, what will happen? Now, after calling this some method, right, it will not wait till this method complete its execution. In this, no, I know that this method is not going to return me anything, but there are two scenarios. So you have two scenarios. What scenarios? You want this method to complete the execution, and this method should give me some confirmation, some acknowledgement that the method execution is completed. Then I am going to execute the next method, right? And some other thing is that the second scenario is that I just need to call the method and I just need to continue the execution of the method. So in that case, as you have write the return type, the first scenario is not possible. What is not possible? It is a asynchronous operation, but in this case, what will happen? That you will not get the confirmation, right? So confirmation means there is no way you can use the await operator, and there is no possibility that the method execution is going to be completed. Then only this method is going to, this statement is going to be executed. This is not possible, right? Why? Because the return type is void. Void is not a promise, right? Void means it is not returning anything, right? So in this case, you will see this main method started, call some method started, call some method, call this statement. This statement is started. It is waiting for the method to complete the execution for 5 seconds. It will not release the thread. That thread will release this statement. This statement, after then this statement is going to be executed, and finally this statement is going to be executed, right? Let me run the application. Main method started, some method started, main method end, right? Achha, why I'm not getting this? Because I have called which method? Call some method. I need to call which method? Call some method. This one. I need to call this method, right? So see, main method started, call some method started, some method started, call some method ended, main method ended, and some method ended. So this possibility that if you want to make sure that some method execution completed, then I want to execute this statement. This is not possible if you are using for. How you can make sure, right? I know my method is not going to return me anything, but I want to make sure that some method execution completed. Then only I want to complete my other statement in the call some method. Then in that case, you need to use a task as the return type, right? Once you use task as the return type, now you have both the options. What are the options? If you want to make sure that this method execution is completed, then I want to execute this statement. Then you can use the await operator here, which will release the current thread, right? And and it will make sure that the sum method execution is completed. Once the sum method execution completed, it will give a confirmation to this method, and then this statement is going to be executed. And if you want that this is method does not return anything, so its return type is task, I'm not bothering about whether the method execution completed or not. I want to continue my method execution, then you simply need to ignore this one. So if you ignore this one, the way the previous example what I have shown using the void data type, the same way this method is going to be work, right? So in this case, if I run the application, you can see the same way it is going to work, right? So you can see main method end right now. So this is the same as void, and if as you are implementing task, you have both the options. So what are the options? You can continue the statement execution immediately without using the await keyword, right? And if you want to make sure that method execution should completed, then what you need to use? You have to use the await keyword like this. So now I'm using await keyword. What will happen? It will call this method, right? Execution started. It is waiting to waiting for this operation, right? And as it is waiting for this operation, the thread will be released. So as the thread is released, in this case, the thread is also going to release await, means this statement is completed, then this statement, then this statement, right? Let me run the application and show you the output. Main method started, call some method started, main method end, then some method end, then this statement is going to be happening. So what is the use of a task return type? Means if your method does not return anything, then you have two options. If you want, you can use void as the return type. If you want, you can use task as the return type, right? And if you use void, then you cannot use await operator right? And if you use task, then you can use await operator. In both the cases, both method are not going to return anything. But using task, you have the extra flexibility. What extra flexibility? It is going to return a promise. What that promise content? That promise content the method execution completed, and you can continue your execution, right? If you do not want that acknowledgement, simply you need to omit the await keyword. Understand what is the use of a task?
Yeah.
Right.
Sir, can you use that promise somewhere? That promise result.
See, in this case, this method, see, I have told you, you are having two types. One is a task and a task of T. Whenever your method do not return anything, you have to use task. If your method going to return something, you have to use task of T. That is what I'm going to show you, right? In this case, the method does not return anything. So what I'm saying, this task is similar to your void type. Void means what? This is not returning anything. So as it is not returning anything, then where you will store that thing? You cannot store because return type is void. So if your method return type is void, can you store the output somewhere in a variable?
No, sir. I gone through code like task dot is complete some properties.
We will discuss this thing. Task dot when all, right? Everything we are going to discuss. Don't worry. Step by step we are going to discuss, right? Wait all, wait any, when completed, when all, right? Everything is there, right? We are going to discuss those things one by one, right? So there is an option called task dot when all, right? You can see when all, right? So you have to use when all, right? If you are executing multiple tasks and you want to all the multiple tasks to be completed, then you have to use when all method, right? There are many things is available. Task dot run, task dot delay. What is we are seeing right now is completed means it's a property, right? It's going to tell whether the operation is completed or not, right? But in that case, but in this task is basically what purpose? It is operation is completed or not, that is what we are going to show you, but not now. What we are trying to show, trying to make you understand is, see, if you see the syllabus, right, it's not like one session or two session, right? So please be patient, right? Everything I'm going to cover, right? But in a proper sequence, right? You can see 17 chapters are there. So when I'm going to use multiple tasks, limit the task, cancel a task, at that time I'm going to show you whether the task is completed or not. If the task is not completed, by using that property, is completed task? No, task is not completed. Let cancel the task, right? Then I will show you whether the task is, I mean, within the 5 seconds, if the task is completed, that is fine. If not completed, let me cancel the task, right? Everything I'm going to cover, but step by step. But what I'm trying to understand is, I'm not going to mix up the things, right? So I'm going to cover, I'm going to make you understand some the things one by one. What is the main purpose of task? Task is basically, it's a promise, right? Which is going to return that the method is going to be completed at some time, right? And if you want, you can wait till the method execution completed by using the await keyword. And if you are not using await, then the method execution is going to be completed as it is, right? So is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Right, so everything sweet. Once the asynchronous programming chapter is completed, if I missed anything, right, then you can tell me. Definitely I'm going to cover those things, right? The way I have started multi-threading and I have completed multi-threading, in the same way I'm going to start the asynchronous programming and async parallel programming, and I will complete the things, right? After then, if you feel that something is missing, right, something is not covered, then please let me know. Not you, but anyone can let me know, and definitely I'm going to cover those things, right? If any. Okay. So this is the thing. And what is task of T? Task of T means if your method going to return something, right, then you have to use task of T. Right? Okay. Let me give you this example for better clarity. So this is my main method. This is my sum method. And here I'm calling the wait method. The same example, but I have shown you this is the same example. right? I'm calling the sum method, and here I'm calling the wait method. Wait method means it's returning a task. So in this case, the execution of this method completed immediately because I have not used the await keyword. If I use the await keyword, then this statement is going to be executed only after this method complete its execution, right? This is the thing that we have discussed now, right? So what exactly this statement I will tell, wait for this operation to finish before running the next line of code, right? So what exactly this I will telling, right? This I will tell to the thread that, hey, Mr. Thread, you only need to execute the next line of statement once this method completes its execution. Once the method, what I'm calling here wait method, once that method completes its execution, then only you can proceed and further execute the rest of the code of this method, right? This is the use of await keyword, right? Await means the next statement what is there in the method is going to be executed only when the method, right, what you are with the asynchronous method, what you are calling is completed. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Sir.
Right. Now, right, so you have two options, right? What are the options? If you want, right, you can use, if you do not want your method to wait, right, for that you can have two options. One is task and one is void, right? So if your asynchronous method does not return, okay, let me give you a brief idea. Async method is YNC, does not return anything, does not return anything, right? If the asynchronous method does not return anything, then you have two options. One is it, what is the return type? Return type you can use as a void. And what is the second option? Return type as task, right? If you are using a task, right? If you are using void, then you cannot await the operation. You cannot await, you cannot await the operation, right? This option is not as possible. If you are using the task, then you can await the operation. You can await the operation. This is the only difference, right? Understand or not? Void means you cannot use the await keyword to await the operation. You cannot make sure the next statement is going to be executed once the asynchronous operation is completed. This is not possible using void. If you are using task, then you can await the operation. If you want that the asynchronous method execution completed, then only I want to execute the rest of the statement. This is possible. And if you want, then you can simply omit the await keyword, then it will be going to execute the rest statement immediately, right? So this is the difference between these two. Now, if someone asks you in the interview, if my method, right, if I'm creating an asynchronous method, right, then and if that asynchronous method does not return anything, then I can use the return type as void, as well as I can use the return type as a task. Then what is the difference between returning return type void and return type task in asynchronous programming? What is the difference between them? You have to tell this. If I'm using return type as void for my asynchronous method, then I cannot avoid that operation, right? So I cannot make sure that the method execution is completed, then only I'm going to execute the rest statement. This is not possible using void return type. And if I'm using return type task, then it's going to return me a promise, right? And as it is returning me a promise, I can make sure that the method execution is completed by using the await operator. And I can if I want, then I can simply also omit the await keyword, so that the method execution after calling the after calling the asynchronous operation, it will continue the method execution as it is, right? I have both the option, whether I want to complete, I want to wait the asynchronous method to be completed or not. That I can do using a task. Both options are available, but using void, I cannot wait the method to be complete its execution. This is the difference between a return type void and the return type task. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So this is the difference between these two things. Right now. So this is fine. We have discussed this task method. We have discussed this void method. Now, what if you want to return some data, right? In this case, the example I'm not returning, and if I'm not returning any data, then I can use void method and I can use task method, right? If your method returning some data, then what you need to use? Already, as we mentioned, what we need to use? We need to use the generic task. So generic task we have to use from the beginning. I have told you, you have to use task of T, and what exactly the type of data you want to return from the asynchronous method, that you need to specify by using this T parameter. Clear? See, so basically, if you want to return a task from your asynchronous method, right, then in that case, you have to use task of T. Clear?
Yes.
Okay, now let us try to understand this with the real-time example, right? And let us try to create one ASP.NET Web API application, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm using Visual Studio 2017 or any other version. If you guys want, you can use. So I'm creating a file, new project, ASP.NET Web application, right? What is the name of the project I'm provided here? Web API demo. Right? So I'm selecting the empty web API project template. After this, I'm going to add a controller with the name greetings controller, right? So how to add a web API controller? Right click on the controller folder, add controller. So here web API controller to empty, select the add button, right? Provide the name as a greetings controller, right? And the name should be end with the keyword controller, right? I click on the add button, right? Then I'm just copy pasting this code. I'm not going to explain what is web API now, right? Because this is not part of our syllabus, right? What I'm trying to show you is I'm just going to create a controller web API, right? Now, if you run the application, right? This is my web API. Right now, I can access this greetings controller from web browser, from console application, from Postman, from anywhere I can access this web API, right? So now you can see I'm trying to access this from web browser and I'm providing the name as James, right? I'm providing the name as James. You can see I'm getting the message, hello James, welcome to web API. Right now, you can also access this using Postman. I'm showing you all the options, right? How you can access the web services. I'm going to show you how to use this thing using Fiddler. Where is Fiddler? Fiddler is uninstalled for my machine. Okay. There is a tool Fiddler which is not currently installed. Okay, in the next session, I will show you Fiddler, right? So what happened? Right? I'm accessing the API from my Postman also. So in this case, you can also say hello James, right? Welcome to web API. So what code I have written here? Now I have written hello. What message, what input I'm getting to this method? I'm appending with the keyword hello and welcome to talk, right? This is my API. Now, what my intention? Now I want to develop one console application, and from that console application, I want to call this service, right? I want to call this resource or you can say service, and this service, while I'm calling, I need to pass some data or some information, some name, and it will give me a greetings message, right? That is what we are going to develop. This is my web service which I have developed now. now. And if you see this web service, this RESTful service, what I'm developing, it is taking some input data and it is going to return me some value. So it is returning some data. How I can store that return data? That is what I need to understand. But before that, suppose now I want to, so this is my console application, right? This is my console application. From this application, I want to consume this web service, right? Or this web API service. So this web service is a external to my to my console application or internal?
External.
External. If it is external, then it is a IO bound operation. And when you are going to implement or when you are going to develop some IO or consume some IO bound operation, right? And whenever you are going to communicate with the external system, then in that case, you need to consider using asynchronous programming, right? So now what we need to do, we need to develop some asynchronous programming, right? Let me copy this code. Okay, so here I'm creating a method, right, where I'm asking the user to enter the name, and whenever the user enter the name, that I'm storing inside the name variable. And from this name variable, I'm calling this sum method, and inside this sum method, right, I'm saying this sum method started, and I'm calling this greetings method. And you can see this greetings method, it's a asynchronous method, and this asynchronous method is returning task of a T. And what is T here, guys?
String.
Strings. That means what? Now my method, my greetings method wants to return a string value, right? This method is going to return a string value. So I'm using a task of a string. If this method going to return some integer value, then I have to use task of integer. If this method is going to return one list value, right? Then I have to use list of employee. If this greetings method going to return a product, then I have to use list task of a product, right? So whatever value that you have to specify within this angular brackets, right? Right, so any value you want to return, you have to replace that value with the data type with this TBA type, right? So if your method going to return integer value, you have to return int here. String, you have to return string. Employee, you have to return employee. Any value, you have to use that type here, right? And then you can see this greetings method I'm calling by passing the name, right? As this method returning something, then that something I can store inside this variable. So this variable where you can also use a string, as this method is going to return me string, right? Then what I'm trying to do is I'm creating a message variable, right? And this message variable is going to return, is going to hold the message, right? What this method is going to return. What this method, right? Greetings API service is returning, it's returning a string value, right? To store that string value, I'm creating this variable and I'm initializing this with empty, right? And then that variable string I'm returning from this method, right? And what I'm doing here, right, I'm creating a HTTP client. So basically it's a class provided by .NET framework, right? And this HTTP client class provides a base class for sending HTTP request and receiving HTTP resource from a resource identified by URI, right? So what it means, if you want to send some HTTP request and if you want to receive some HTTP response, right, then you have to use this HTTP client class, and to this client class you have to specify a URI. URI means uniform resource identifier, right? A particular for a particular resource, a particular URI is there. That URI you have to pass, and that URI is going to return some data. And you can see what type of operation you want. You want delete operation, you want get operation, you want post operation, right? You want to put operation, any operation you want, you that operation data, right, based on the data, right? So data in the sense based on the type of the operation. In this case, it is a get operation, right? If you want to create a put operation, then you have to use HTTP put verb. If you want to create a delete operation, then you have to use HTTP delete here, right? So and in this case, it's a get operation, HTTP get. So here what I'm writing, I'm using get async. If it's a put operation, then I have to write it put async, right? And this is my base address. I'm creating an instance. And in this HTTP client, there is a property called base address. You can see this base address. Using this property, you can get and set the base address of your resource, right? Where, what is the base address? Base address for my application is this one. Let me copy this URL, 54355 in your machine, right? In your machine, that address might be a different one. Right? So based on your port number, you have to replace this one, right? So this is my best address. After putting the base address, right, I have to call the get async method. And as it's a async method, right, the asynchronous operation, right? So I can use the await operator. Once I'm using the await operator, what it will make sure? It will make sure the next statement that is present here, or this assignment operation is only going to be done once this method returns some data. Once this method, right, what I'm calling here, right, once this get async method completed, then only the assignment will be done, and then only the return, right, then only the next statement is going to be executed. This is the base address. Only calling the base address is not possible, right? Like this method, there are many methods might be available in this API, right? So what I need to specify, I need to specify the particular resource URI. So in this case, how I can access this? I have to access this by API slash greeting slash name, right? Like the way I have written here, API slash this dot gems, I can copy this thing, right? I can paste it here, right? But in this case, I do not want to hard-coded the name. I'm getting the name as a parameter. So you can use this double quote, right? Open and close curly braces as you have using this string interpolation, right? So it will convert this things to its actual value, right? So here you will see API slash greeting slash whatever value you have passed to this name parameter, that will be stored here, right? And once this method execution completed, it will return a response. And from this response, what content is there, right? What content means, in that case, it will return this content, right? I want to read this content from start to end, right? For that, I have written read as a string async method, right? This will read the string content from this response, and that response will be stored inside this message. And again, it's a async operation, right? While reading the data from the response string, it is also a async operation. And as it is a async operation, I'm again using this await operator to make sure that once this operation completed, whatever content written by this get async method, or whatever content is stored inside this content variable of this response message, right, that will be read. And that once it read, then I'm going to store inside this string message variable, right? And then I'm returning this message, and that message, right, is going to return by this greetings method. Again, it's a async method. Again, it is going to return a string, right? Like the way you are calling this method using await operator, in the same way I'm calling this method await operator, and in this case, it is going to return me a string message. And that message, right, what it is written, what is written by the API, right, that is what I'm returning from this method, and that will be stored inside this variable, right? Now, if I run the application, then you will see the appropriate output as expected, right? And before that, before calling this method, make sure your web service is running, your web API application is running, and you can see this button means it's in running mode. Once it is running, right, then you can so enter the name. I'm entering Pranaya. Some method started, main method end, right? Hello Pranay, welcome to web API. This hello Pranay, welcome to web API. This is the thing which is returning from our external API, right? This is the thing which is going to return by the external system. And to get these things from the external system, I'm making use of asynchronous programming. And in this case, the asynchronous programming, right? For this asynchronous programming, I'm using task upstream. Clear? Right? And this is the usual scenario, ideal scenario where you can use asynchronous programming. Now, if you do not want this thing, then you can simply write some message here, right? What I can say, some message, right? Some message, right? So in this case, you can see some message is going to be displayed, right? So what I can do here is I simply write these things here, right? Right? Hello. And here I have to provide the string interpolation, right? Hello. Whatever message you have provided, that is going to return from this method. And this is not name, this is going to be name. Clear? So now let me run the application, right? Enter the name, James, right? Some method started, hello James, welcome to AVP. Some method end and main method end. So this is how you need to return data from your asynchronous method. So if you want to return some data, right, simply writing string is not applicable here. Simply writing string is not applicable here, right? So what you need to write, you have to see, in this case, I'm writing string, I'm returning a string, that is fine. But that string you cannot simply return from your asynchronous method. If you want to return, then you have to encapsulate that string within the task. Clear? Guys,
Yes, sir.
this is how you need to return. If you are not returning anything, you can simply use the task. If you are returning some data, then that data you need to specify using the task, right? Generic task. And that data, the way you are returning, you have to return simply like the same way. And here, if you want to, if you want this response to be stored some variable, right? You have to store like this, right? And this is how, right, you have to use with this method, right? So in this case, while it is awaiting for this method to complete, right, it will not wait till the method completes its execution, right? It will release the thread and the thread can continue execution of other things. And then once this method returns some data, then it will come and it will execute the rest of the things. Is that clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right? So let me remove these things. Let me make this string dot empty, right? Let me uncomment these things, right? So this is how you have written. Now, it is not possible that, say, once you are calling any third-party APIs, right? If you are calling any third-party APIs, it is not always possible that the API is going to return the appropriate data. Sometimes some error might be occurred. Suppose in this case, localhost this, right? Greetings. So I'm putting greetings to. There is no endpoint, right? There is no resource which is having greetings to in my the API, right? There is no greetings to. So in that case, it is going to return me some error. If some error is occur, then how this task handle that error? That is what we need to understand, right? So for that, what we need to do, we need to do some little bit changes, right? So what I'm trying to do is I'm putting this statement here, right? We will ensure that ensure success status code. So what is this method is all about? If you go to the definition, it is saying throw an exception if the success property of the HTTP response is false. So what it exactly what it means? It means, right? It means if this response property, right? It means if this response property returns false, then it will going to throw an exception. If the response property is return false, then it is going to throw an exception. And when it is going to return false, when the API is endpoint is not available. In this case, there is no endpoint with greetings to. In that case, it is returning false. And if it is false, then it is going to throw one exception. If it is throwing that exception, then how that exception is going to be handled, that is what we need to understand, right? For now, right, if you run the application, then you will see this 404 not found exception, right? Let me run the application. Right? So if you take this one response, right, each success code, what is this value?
False.
Right? False. If each success code is false, right? Ensure success status code. This statement is going to throw me one exception. As of now, I have not get any exception. Now I'm clicking on this continue button. It is throwing me error that response status code indicate not success, 404 not found. That means the resource you are trying to consume, that resource is not available. When not available, it is going to return 404 exception. But do you think that throwing exception is a good thing?
No.
So in this case, what we need to do, we need to handle that exception, right? We need to handle that exception. How we are going to handle that exception? Simply by using the try catch block, right? Simply by using the try catch block, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm just modifying these things, right? So what I'm trying to do, I'm just modifying. So here, this is my try block, this is my catch block. If it throw the exception, right, then this method is called by this sum method, right? So the sum method means this is the try block. Try block means what? It will throw that exception to this block, right? And from this block, the rest of the code, right, from this block, it will catch the exception and this statement is going to be executed. So from this statement, it will not execute this statement, it will come to the catch block. And what type of exception it is throwing? It is throwing HTTP request exception, right? If you are not sure what kind of exception it is going to throw, you can simply use exception. If you are not sure what kind of exception, you can simply use exception. Why it is going to be acceptable? Because this is the super class of all exception classes. Yes or no?
Yes.
Right. So in this case, right, now run the application and see what is happening. Right, error occurred, response status code does not indicate success, 404 not found, right? This is the message I'm getting, and now I'm not getting any kind of error. And how this exception message is coming to this, that is what we need to understand, right? So now what will happen if we omit the await keyword while calling the greetings method, right? Suppose while calling the greetings method, you just omit the await keyword, then what will happen, right? Simply, okay, let me show you. So in this case, you simply omit this await keyword. Then what will happen? So in this case, as you omit the await keyword, do you think that this statement is going to wait till the method execution completed? Okay, let me show you this thing practically. Right, see, after executing this statement, it is directly come to this part. And here, what he is saying, this status is waiting for activation, right? You cannot get the message here. Why you cannot get the message here? Because you have not await the operation. If you have not await the operation, it is not waiting till the method execution is completed, so you can proceed further, right? Now, if you go to the next statement, right, so you will see that method execution completed, right? Some method it is returning task, right? So this is not possible, right? Let me comment these things, right? So this is not possible, right? So what will happen if you omit the keyword? Then what will happen? Does this method, this statement, wait till the method complete its execution?
No.
No, that means it will continue its execution. No? It will execute this method, then it will come to this statement, then it will come to this statement. This thing is going to happen immediately or not?
Yes.
Right now. Now what will happen? Now you guys tell me. I'm writing 2 here. Right? If I'm writing 2 here, in this case, what will happen? Is it going to catch the exception or not?
No.
Why? If no, why? If yes, how?
It is not waiting till the response is coming. So
if it is not waiting till the response is not coming, then how it will capture the exception details here? Right? Whatever input is coming, whatever exception is coming, right, that will be only come in the form of a task. And whatever task you have written, that task will capture the output data. That task is only going to capture the exception information. But in this case, are we awaiting the task to be completed, or we are simply continuing our execution?
We are just continuing our execution.
We are simply continuing our execution. That means in this case, that exception information will not be captured here. Why? Because we are not bothering about whether this method execution completed or not, whether that execution completed with successfully or completed with failure. I'm not bothering about. I'm simply calling the method and I'm simply doing my task. So in this case, this catch block will not catch that exception. Now, if you run the application, right, then you will see that, right? I'm coming to this part, some method end, some method and main method end, right? So you can see this is the thing, right? So the thing that you need to remember is if your method is throwing some exception, right? If you are not awaiting that method execution, right, then that in that case also the execution details will not be captured, right? In this case, if you await this thing, then only this method is waiting till the method execution is completed, and once the method execution completed, then it will return one promise. Task means what? One promise, and that promise will contain the exception information, and that promise will going to throw the exception, and that exception is going to catch by this catch block, right? If you are not waiting, right, then you will not get the exception information, right? You can see this is the exception information. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Right? So this is the thing that you need to remember. So how to use a task of a T, how to use a T, and so now if someone asks you when to use void and when to use task and when to use task of a T, can anybody explain me when to use what?
So if you don't want to wait for the response, if you then you need to use void. If you want to
No,
wait,
say,
then
say, say, if you don't wait for the response, so this is partially correct. If your method does not return anything, then we have two options. What are the options? One is void and one is task, right? And if we do not want to bother whether the method execution completed or not, right, then we can use void. And if we want to make sure that the method execution is completed, then only I'm going to execute the next statement, then I'm going to use task. And if I want to return some data from the asynchronous method, then I have to use task of a tree, right? And while using task or task of T, awaiting the operation is optional. If I'm using the await operator before the method calling statement, then that method execution is going to be, right, the statement which I've written after the method calling statement is going to be in waiting period. Waiting in the sense what the method execution completed, then only the statement which I've written after the method calling statement is going to be executed. If I'm not using await, then it is going to be execute the rest of the statement immediately after calling the method. This is the only difference, right? Void and the task you can use when your method does not return anything. Void means you cannot wait the method to be completed. Task means you have the option, you have the clarity, right? If you want to make sure that the method execution completed and I want to get a response, right? Yes, the method execution completed, then I have to use task, and I have to use the await operator while calling the method. Task of T means if your method is going to return some data. Clear?
yes.
Right. So this is about your task, async and await operator, right? This is the base thing, right? Once you understand this async, how to use async, how to use await, right? What is task and the task of T, and how to use when to use void, right? This is the best thing. Once you understand this thing, then the rest of the things what we are going to discuss from tomorrow, this will be not that difficult, even though there are advanced concept of asynchronous programming, but those are very you can easily understand if you understand this thing, right? Any question from anyone? right? So see, anytime you are seeing any async, so by default you can see any asynchronous method which is provided by .NET Framework, you can always see this async keyword, right? If you are seeing this async keyword, means it's an asynchronous method or asynchronous operation. Any asynchronous operation, you can use the await keyword. So here it is an asynchronous method. I'm using await keyword. This is an asynchronous method. I'm using again the await keyword. This is an asynchronous method, right? Async. So greetings async. So instead of a greetings, so you can write async, that is see, this is the standard way of writing the asynchronous method. So you have to write greetings async, right? So as it is an async method, I can use await operator. Using await is optional, so I can simply remove the await operator. That is also fine, right? But clear?
So one doubt. Suppose if we are not using await operation on async mode, what will happen to that request which we send to the other server, which is returning some?
See what I'm saying. So if you are using asynchronous operation, right? If you are calling that asynchronous operation, 100% that operation is going to be performed. See, in this case, if I'm not using the async, right, I simply call this async method here. That means behind the scene, this operation is 100% going to be performed, right? Behind the scene, this method is going to be executed. But we have not received any response from the method. But see, I'm calling this API, right? I'm calling this API. This API returning some data. So once I'm using an async and calling this method, means this method body is 100% going to be executed. But what will happen? What this method is returning, right? That I'm not going to handle. Right? So this is the use of asynchronous program. 100% see, any method you are calling asynchronous method, means that method execution 100% is going to be completed. And if you want that confirmation that the method execution completed, then you have to use the await keyword. And once you use the await keyword, it will give you a confirmation, right, that the method execution completed. Then you can proceed with the next statement. If you are not using await keyword, that means behind the scene, this method execution is going to be completed, and the rest of the statement of this method is going to be clear.
Yes.
Okay. Any question from anyone?
No.
Okay, fine. Thank you, guys.
So one note.
Yeah, tell me.
Like if there is any database transaction, so we are not receiving any response. Will the database transaction also is going to happen in this case?
Definitely, it is going to happen. See, what I'm saying from the beginning, right? You are having different layers, right? One is your business logic layer, right? One is UI layer, or you can say presentation layer, right? UI layer or presentation layer. He's calling business logic layer, right? Business logic layer calling data access layer, right? Data access layer is communicating with the database, right? So if you are calling one storage procedure in the database, means that storage procedure 100% is going to be executed. If you are calling one method from BL to DL, means that DL method, right, it's 100% is going to execute. You are see. So the point is also what I mean to tell is two things you need to understand. Let me remove this thing, right? Suppose I'm creating one method. So public static integer sum. Right? This sum method is going to return me some data. Return 10, right? And here I'm calling this sum method. I'm calling this sum method. Now this sum method is going to return me some data. Now it is up to me whether I need to capture this data or not. If I want to capture, I can capture and store inside a variable. If I'm not bothering about the output, right, what this method is returning, I'm not really interested. I can simply call this method. So in this case, you are capturing the output In this case, you are not capturing the output. But once you call this method, that means that method definitely going to be executed. So in the same case in asynchronous programming, once you call some async, let's assume that this is an async sum method, right? Async sum method, right? This is one async sum method, right? And you are calling this async sum method using await operator. Then in that case, what this method is going to return, right? You can handle that output. If you are not using await operation in this case, that method, what is going to return that you cannot handle, but behind the scene, that method is going to execute it or not,
Yes.
right? This
Only
is the
thing is
main.
we are not bothering about the output of it, and we're just proceeding with our next step.
Exactly. If you are not bothering whether the method, I'm not bothering about whether the method execution completed or not, whether the method giving some error or not, right? If I'm not bothering, then I can simply move forward and without using the await operator. If you want to bother whether the method execution completed successfully or not, whether the method throwing some error or not, then in that case you need to use the await operator, right? But once you call the method, means that the method definitely going to execute. Right? It might be possible that the method execution completed successfully. It might be possible that method execution completed with some error. That is the other thing. But if you call means that method is going to definitely execute,
Okay.
right?
So if the main thread of our console application end before that also, still it will complete its execution and it can complete after that also. That possibility.
You just tell me what is the difference between foreground thread and background thread?
Foreground thread is the one which is executing the application flow, and background thread is one which is uh, executing at the background. I mean, like it will complete the task and it will end.
You are in wrong position. Foreground thread means what? The method execution is completed even though your main thread is quit. Background thread means it will complete, if your main thread quit, the background thread is also going to quit. So in this case, the thread which is going to execute is going to be foreground thread, right? So in this case, and two more things you have to remember, right? So here we are communicating with the external application, right? From your, so this is my application. This my application is a console application. I'm calling this web API application. The thread which is going to execute this application is completely a different one. There is no link between your main application thread and this application, right? For example, I'm using this one, right? Okay, let me give you that clarity. Hmm. Right? So in this case, I have put the debugger point here, right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm omitting this await keyword, right? I'm omitting this await keyword and I'm commenting these things, right? So in this case, what will happen? Let's see. So you will see that main thread execution completed, right? I'm entering the name James, right? So my debugger point come to this point, right? Debugger will come to my web application too. I'm not interested. I can simply, you can simply ignore these things, right? Now your main application is here, right? So you can continue. So there are two different threads. See? So what are the things? Your main thread is going to be execute this application code, and a different thread is going to execute your web services, right? There is no link between your application and your code, right? So for example, if I'm calling this from my application, right? Again, you can see these things is going to be happening, right? That means what? A different thread is going to be created to execute this application code. And this application code, right, this greetings controller is altogether a different system. There is no link between this application code and your console application code. For executing your console application, different threads are there. For executing this application code, different threads are there. Right? So there is no link between your thread which is executing your main application, console application, and the thread which is executing your web services. Why? Because there are two different systems, right? So consider one example. You have developed one application on your machine, right? And the web service you are trying to consume, which is available on my machine, right? Do you think that your thread, right, what thread available on your machine, that thread will come to my machine and will execute my application code, or the thread which is available on my machine, that those thread is going to execute my application code?
The thread on your machine will execute.
Exactly. So this doesn't matter, right? So your main thread means what? It's going to execute the thread, main thread, or any other thread which are available on your machine, on your application. Those threads are responsible to execute your application code. Not they are not bothered about what is happening on the external system. External system means they are having some external thread, right? They are available in that machine. They are going to execute that application code. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So any question from anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you. Thank you for attending the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.